Well, today we're looking at Lamentations 5, the first 18 verses of chapter 5, the last chapter in our study of Lamentations. The title, The Remnant's Response. So again, we're in the last chapter of Lamentations, and it's a chapter full of differences. First, it's more a pair of prayers than a funeral dirge. It's not an acrostic. It's still a poem, but it's not an acrostic poem. The verses are not tied to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet as the other 4 chapters were. It's not of the same poetic form, and according to those who know poetry, it is not of the same meter as the first 4. The first 3 chapters ended, however, with a short prayer. And when we get to that point, somewhere along the line, we may look at those 3. They were the last 3 verses, 20, 21, 22 of chapters 1, chapter 2, and then because of the different structure of each verse in chapter 3, it was verses 55 through 66. So, since chapter 4, however, had no ending prayer, some take chapter 5 to be that ending prayer. Actually, 2 ending prayers. So keep that in mind. The chapter is essentially, as I said, 2 prayers. The first 18 verses issue a call to Yahweh to remember. Remember them, to remember the covenant, and to be faithful to his promises in the covenant. A call to Yahweh to remember their indignities, but when he says remember, he really says remember and act. And they want to reprisals against Babylon after they end their indignities, as they called them. Lamentations 5:1, for example, has 2 lines. Remember, O Yahweh, what has befallen us. Remember what our situation been all this time. Look and see our reproach. It's a confession of sin under the covenant. And then they're going to talk about what's next. In the last, 4 verses, 19 to 22, is a short prayer calling for Yahweh to restore the land and restore the covenant. And while Yahweh is out it, to restore them to good standing in the covenant. So the key is restoration. So let's get on with it. Lamentations 5, verses 2 and 3. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our houses to aliens. We have become orphans without a father. Our mothers are like widows. A lot of sadness there. The land was the land promised to Abraham's descendants, the promised land, if you please. But it's now under the control of alien nations and peoples to whom it has been parceled out by Babylon. However, the land was not Israel's land, but Yahweh's. Do you remember that? He made that clear in Exodus 19:5, where he says, Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And in Leviticus 25 to 23, even more pointed. The land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land, that's the promised land, is mine. For you, his people, the Israelites, are but aliens and sojourners with me. So he's letting them know they don't own the land, it's his land. What they are essentially tenant farmers or tenants who tend for the land. They occupied it and used the land, but under some understood contractual obligations, namely the law under the covenant. Israel's right to occupy it was conditional, contingent on their adherence to the law of the covenant as declared in the blessings and cursings outlined in Deuteronomy 28, 29, and 30. Let me move to a couple of other verses here. For example, Genesis 12:7a, talking about the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Remember, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob never owned significant portion of this land. It was not theirs, but it was to go to the descendants eventually. Deuteronomy 6:18. This is part of the description of behavior after the Shema. Behold, the Lord our God is one Lord. Then this follows in verse 18. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of Yahweh. It may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which Yahweh swore to give to your fathers. Deuteronomy 4, backing up in Deuteronomy of it, verses 25 and 26. 4, 25, and 26. When you become the father of children, this is part of the Shema again, and children's children have remained long in the land and act corruptly and make an idol in the form of anything and do that which is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you shall surely perish quickly from the land where you are going over the Jordan to possess it. This is Moses delivering some of these things. You shall not live long on it, but shall be utterly destroyed. He says, you guys aren't immune from my wrath if you do evil, if you worship false gods, if you do not follow the law under the covenant. So their time in the land was contingent upon their behavior and their obedience to the law. At the time of Lamentations, Babylon dominated the land with an occupying force and had given others rights to it as well. I'm remembering off the top that Nehemiah faced small tribal nations who were in the land, assuming they were using it as if they owned it, and they were in opposition to what Nehemiah was trying to do in rebuilding the wall. But look at Jeremiah 40, verse 7. They heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, over the land. So they've sent another puppet in charge of the land, and that he had put him in charge of the men, women, and children, those of the poorest of the land. It was these poorest people with no influence and no experience at governing that were left in the land. Everybody of any means, of any education, of any capabilities was exiled. And they are people who had not been exiled to Babylon. So if you were left, it means that you were essentially a nobody as far as Babylon was concerned. So other people have become like the most vulnerable, the widows and orphans who were in need of Yahweh's benevolent patron, as their benevolent patron, benefactor, however term you wish to use. The Babylonian rule was quite severe. Looking at verses 4 and 5 in Lamentations 5. Now, another 4 lines. We have to pay for our own, I'm inserting the word own, that's what the Hebrew would say should be there, I understand. We have to pay for our own drinking water. Our own wood comes to us at a price. Our pursuers are at our necks. We are worn out. There is no rest for us. So this was, you talk about taskmasters. I think that was what they faced in Egypt, and the Lord brought them out of it. Now it appears that the Babylonians are every bit as bad and hard on them as Egypt was. But then they knew that such a rule was possible. I'm looking at Deuteronomy 28. This is part of the curses if you didn't follow the covenant rules. Deuteronomy 28, verses 65, 66, and 67. And it says this, among those nations you shall find no rest. That's those nations to which you are scattered or exiled. And there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing of eyes, and despair of soul. So this is part of the cursing. So your life shall hang in doubt before you. You shall be in dread night and day, and shall have no assurance of your life. You don't know if you're going to live to tomorrow. Actually, that's true of all of us, isn't it? But he says this is going to be so obvious, you'll be thinking and worrying about it. Verse 67, in the morning you shall say, would it that it were evening, and wanting the day to be over. And at evening you shall say, oh, that we're morning. The night was dread. What is it finished in? Because of the dread of your heart, which you dread, and for the sight of your eyes, which you shall see. So everything that you're aware of says, I can't stand this. If it's daytime, I'm wishing it's at night. If it's nighttime, I'm wishing it's during the day. Nothing was satisfactory during the exile time. Ezekiel even adds some. Chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. So as I live, declares the Lord God, surely because you have defiled my sanctuary with all your detestable idols and with all your abominations. You can find some of that in Jeremiah, by the way. Therefore I will also withdraw. And he did. Remember, he took his presence out of the temple and from Jerusalem. And my eye shall have no pity, and I will not spare. 1/3 of you will die by plague or be consumed by famine among you. 1/3 will fall by the sword around you. 1/3 I will scatter to every wind. So 2/3 of the people are not going to live. 1/3 going to be scattered. Almost no one left in the city of Jerusalem. And I will unsheathe a sword chasing behind them. I assume that means the sword will continually keep you on the run. The Judeans have become vassals of foreigners rather than tenants of Yahweh's land. Look at 2 Kings, 2 Kings 25:24. And Gedaliah, that's Nebuchadnezzar's agent, swore to them and their men and said to them, "Do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans." The servants were low-level Babylonian officers, apparently, those pretty low on the totem pole. And the Gedaliah goes on, continued to say, "Live in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will be well with you." So he's giving them advice. Don't be nervous about it. Go there and then live well and serve the king. So let's go back to Lamentations 5 again, verses 6 through 8. And they said this talking about themselves. Notice this is a we, our, us. It's collective. "We have submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough bread." What does submit mean? Shaking the hands. That implies that they were trying to form some kind of pact and alliance with Egypt and Assyria, two major, strong, powerful past enemies. They're going there to try and get enough food to eat. "Our fathers sinned and are no more." Now they're going to blame the fathers. "It is we who have borne their iniquities." Says, not only they said earlier, of course, that they themselves had sinned, but now they said, we're here in this situation because of our fathers' sins. Slaves rule over us. That's those low-level Babylonian officers. There is no one to deliver us from their hand. So not only are they slaves themselves to Babylon now, they're ruled by slaves. Again, submit, when he's talking about Assyria and Egypt, it means to clasp the hands, to agree to some form of pact or treaty with them in order to get food. But they had made pacts with Assyria and Egypt in an effort to, as I said, to get enough food to feed the people. Where were they trying to get food? From two nations that had been roundly defeated by Babylon. So those two nations were not going to come back and defend them from Babylon. Their hope is that they can simply get food from them. Recall that Judah had asked Egypt to help them defend against Babylon. Babylon had already defeated Assyria, and then just before 586 BC, Zedekiah, the king who was put there by Nebuchadnezzar, said, "I'm not paying you anymore," and he tried to get Egypt to come and help him fight against Babylon. Egypt left the siege momentarily and utterly destroyed Egypt. Babylon left the siege and destroyed Egypt's army. Of course, Babylon had, as I said a minute ago, earlier had destroyed Assyria's war capabilities well before 605 BC and the first siege of Jerusalem. Notice here that the complaint involves the fathers' sin, for which now they are reaping the consequences. They also were reaping the consequences of their own sin. But remember, in that culture, your sins, you assume the responsibility for the sins of the nation. The corporate sin was your sin as well. So that's why they brought the fathers up. They knew that Israel had a long history ever since they left Egypt. They had a long history of rebellion against Yahweh. Those who were once slaves in Egypt were now ruled by slaves, the military officials of Babylon, who were as cruel taskmasters as Israel suffered under in Egypt. Well, let's go to verses 9 and 10 of Lamentations 5. We get our bread at the risk of our lives because of the sword in the wilderness. So evidently, if they left Egypt or left Israel or left Jerusalem or left Judah and went out trying to find food in the wilderness parts outside of the cities, they would run the risk of nomadic groups who would come after them to kill them, take booty, whatever. Then in verse 10, our skin has become as hot as an oven because of the burning heat of famine. So for some reason, the hunger and the famine they were undergoing were causing some sort of illness that created evidently temperatures, high temperatures, fever. Apparently, again, the search for food put them at risk of roaming bands of nomads, and their hunger had seemingly brought fever of some sort. Next, the narrative switches from the first person, I, we, us, to the third person, they, them, so forth, as the pain of several different groups is described. So let's look at some of those groups. They ravished the women in Zion, and everybody has an idea of how conquering armies treat women. The virgins in the cities of Judah. So the women take it very difficult in their confrontation with soldiers of conquering nations. Verse 12, princes were hung by their hands, elders were not respected. Those in charge, responsible for ruling, for law and order, for wisdom, had problems. The princes were tortured by hanging them by their hands. And by the way, sometimes that meant they were not only hung by their hands, but then after being tortured, they could be impaled on spears, posts of some sort. And of course, that would mean their death. And the elders were not respected. They were either killed or exiled, because these guys, princes and elders, would be those who had some wherewithal to resist. So they were exiled for the most part or killed. Young men worked at the grinding mill, and youths stumbled under the loads of wood. So this is the third group. First one, women, young women, old women. The second one, the leaders of the nation. The third one, young men. What are they doing? Working at the grinding mill, normally a donkey or an ox would pull that. So they're doing the work of animals. And they stumbled under their loads of wood. They had to pack heavy loads as a ox or a donkey would. In verse 14, elders are gone from the gate. There's no one to sit to adjudicate legal matters and justice. Young men from their music. And the young men, under the loads that are placed on them, the mundane, nothing work, just do work, cause the young men to lose their songs. They no longer sing, they no longer play instruments, their music is missing. Well, as typical, again, it's not surprising, women suffer most from godless, conquering soldiers. The ruling elite were tortured or killed by being hung, dangling from a tree, or impaled on a stake, or dangling from a tree after death was a humiliation. So they knew that this was telling people, look, these guys are nothing to us. Let's look at Deuteronomy 21, 22 to 23, which describes this a bit. It says, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and there were a lot of capital cases under Israel law, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day as he dies. For he who is hanged is accursed of God, or he who is hanged on the tree is accursed of God, which is Christ on a foretelling of Christ on the cross, of course. So that you do not defile your land. In other words, that you leave somebody hanging on a tree overnight, you have defiled your land, meaning the land that I allow you to possess, which Yahweh, your God, gives you as an inheritance. But remember, he also says, under right conditions, or actually, if you please, the very wrong conditions, that right can be rescinded. Wisdom and justice, as we mentioned a minute ago, was gone from the city gates as elders were killed or exiled. Finally, the young men who remained were enslaved to menial work that was formerly done by animals. Their songs were missing from their lips. There was no joy in their hearts. Existence in Jerusalem and Judah was bleak. It was different for different groups of people, but bleak in all cases. Wisdom, justice, happiness, gone. And let's look at the last 4 verses of Lamentations 5, verses 15 to 18. The joy of our hearts has ceased. They just said what we said a minute ago. It's gone. Our dancing has been turned into mourning. What was a joyful experience is now mourning. The crown has fallen from our head. We're no longer a glorious nation. We're just people eking out some kind of existence. Woe to us, for we have sinned. Now they owned up again to the fact that they have sinned under the covenant. Because of this, our heart is faint. We are full of fear. Because of these things, our eyes are dim, probably because of tears. Because of Mount Zion, which lies desolate, foxes or jackals, depending upon your translation, prowl in it. So what they're saying here is that even in the sanctuary, in what used to be the temple, even though it's destroyed, it's now the haunt of foxes or jackals, wild animals. Happiness and joy is vanished, along with dancing that is replaced by mourning. Remember David's statement about the same, the mourning turns to joy in the morning. These people, no way. The glory or the crown of Judah is gone because their personal and corporate sin under the covenant. Judah's statehood was gone, is no longer a functioning nation. It was a vassal controlled by Babylon. Power politics just hadn't worked. There was nothing they could do to find an alliance that would keep them. And of course, they shouldn't even have been looking for alliances. They should have been relying on Yahweh, who was originally, with his intent, to be their king. Jeremiah 13 says something related to this, verses 17 and 18. But if you will not listen to it, my soul will sob in secret for such pride, and my eyes will bitterly weep and flow down with tears, because the flock of Yahweh has been taken captive. This is Jeremiah speaking before it ever happened. Say to the king, which was Jehoiakim at that time, or Jeconiah or Coniah. So say to the king and the queen mother, take a lowly seat, for your beautiful crown has come down from your head. If you remember, we talked briefly about that, but Jehoiakim went out when Nebuchadnezzar came back in 586, went back and was taken to Babylon along with his mother and his family, were taken to Babylon as exile captives. They were saying, our hearts are faint from fear. We have no vision for the future. Our land and city are desolate, and wild beasts prowl through the sanctuary. Clearly, a veil of gloom and doom has hovered over the people of Jerusalem and Judah. Sadness, sickness, and mourning bring despair. There is hunger, there is tears as a result of our personal and corporate sin. Life is hard and disjointed. Yahweh has and is disciplining us, but that in fact is good news, as the poet told us in chapter 3. Yahweh remains faithful to his promises under the covenant. In this case, it's his promises to curse evil behavior. And they're saying we're still under the covenant of his love, though. He's disciplined us, means he hasn't chucked us aside. There is light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. Hope remains. Faith remains. To cry, to remember, means that faith is still alive. Perhaps Yahweh will be stirred to action. And next time we're going to look at the second prayer set that we talked about early. So next time we're going to finish Lamentations. We'll see you then. Thank you.